Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Anthony Mills, and this is the March 2023 GI&I webinar. We're glad to have you with us. As most of you know, Global Innovation Institute is the world's leading professional certification, business accreditation, and membership organization in the field of innovation, with authorized providers and organizations participating in the program all over the world and individuals certified globally. So we're glad to have you here with us today, and glad that you were able to join us for this month's webinar. What I'd like to do now is introduce our guest for today and tell you a little bit about him and what he'll be talking about. And then afterwards, I'll turn it over to him. So our guest today is Mr. Gabor George Burt. He is a global pioneer on creative transformation, future shaping strategy, and intellectual wellness. Gabor is one of the original core experts on blue ocean strategy, this millennium's most influential leadership concept, and contributor to the worldwide best-selling book on blue ocean strategy. Gabor is also the creator of the Slingshot framework, which he launched in 2011 as an expansion of his blue ocean strategy work. Slingshot enjoys worldwide recognition at the forefront of future shaping innovation. In fact, Gabor himself has been recognized as being amongst the top 13 future shaping innovation visionaries. The Slingshot framework shows how to engage creative thinking to systematically reimagine market boundaries, thus filling a critical global need. Indeed, an IBM survey of 1,500 CEOs worldwide found that creativity is the single most important and lacking leadership trait for future success. Gabor's critically acclaimed privately available book, Slingshot, is a step-by-step guide to reimagining boundaries, serving as an exclusive resource for partner organizations and event audiences. He is also launching the Slingshot Awards to recognize organizations, individuals, and initiatives that are reimagining boundaries to have the greatest impact. In his work, Gabor works with leadership teams of multinationals, governments, NGOs, SMEs, and startups in applying the Slingshot framework to reimagining their market boundaries and thereby carving out high-growth strategies. As part of this, he leads immersive gatherings for VIP participants. Among Gabor's high-profile engagements have been helping American Express launch an entire new business in partnership with Walmart, giving the opening keynote presentation at Global Marketing Forum, designing and hosting the Forum for Partnership of the Americas, a gathering of business and government leaders from across the Western Hemisphere, sharing the stage with Seth Godin and Sir Richard Branson at Forum One, one of Europe's largest leadership events with 5,000 participants, designing and co-hosting the first Arab Innovation Forum, and speaking multiple times at the Dubai Knowledge Summits, giving the closing keynote presentation at Africa Rising Conference, and serving as one of 3 judges for the EU Innovation Venture Award. Gabor has also published a number of key thought-leading articles in several world-leading publications, including Harvard Business Review, Forbes, the Conference Board, CEO World Magazine, Disruption Hub, and Entrepreneur Magazine. Finally, Gabor is also a member of our Board of Advisors at Global Innovation Institute, and you can learn more about Gabor and his work at www.gaborgeorgeburt.com. And so with that, I'd like to now turn it over to Gabor, who will be talking to us today about turning crisis into opportunity. Please join me, if you will, in welcoming Mr. Gabor George Burt. Gabor, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony. Thank you for having me. First of all, let me just make sure that the connection is good. Is the audio, video both working well?
Everything
I
is
see
good.
thumbs up. And also, thank you for that obituary that you shared with everyone. Almost sounded like that. You were more than generous in saying all those things. I think the only thing that needed to be said was the very last. That I'm on your advisory board, and I think that would be sufficient in terms of giving me the credibility for today's event. So. As Anthony, as you said, the topic that we thought would be most interesting is this one about turning crisis into opportunity. And so let me share my screen with you on this topic. And what I had in mind is just to give you a presentation that's maybe 30, 35 minutes long. My slides are all visual. They're very light on text, but just to help to get the key messages across, and then open it up to questions. But since we're an intimate group, if you feel like you want to interject with something immediately, you can, or at least put it in the chat. And Anthony, I'm sure you'll be monitoring that along the way. So here we crisis into opportunity. As a point of departure, I'd like to share with you a fun fact. In 1925, so about 100 years ago, this German inventor came up with this wonderful invention that you see here called the isolator. And as you see, the whole point was to devise something that would cut off the entire world so you can really focus and concentrate on what you wanted to do at that particular moment. And it strikes me as very ironical that, of course, our great challenge over the last 3 years was the opposite, that we had sudden unwanted isolation thrust upon us. And it was an incredible social experiment to see how we would deal with that. But it is our choice. And I love this quote by Paul Romer, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. So how do we look at something that's unexpected, something that turns everything upside down and brings our normal to a stop? And so if we have that choice, how do we make it so that we see the positive, that we see it as an opportunity? Well, one thing we can do is just quickly look back and see that a lot of companies and a lot of organizations, in fact, thrived during crisis or were born during crisis. FedEx is a great example. Shortly after their launch in the early 1970s, the oil crisis hit, which was directly impacting their biggest cost, which was fuel. But this was one of the reasons that they became so resilient and so effective, so efficient in their operations. I don't know if you knew, but Nintendo and Nokia are both companies that were launched in the 19th century, and they have transformed multiple times and went through all kinds of great crises that they were able to survive, withstand, and in fact, emerge from even stronger than before. So Nokia at one time was making rubber boots and rifles, and Nintendo had a taxi service and even a chain of love hotels. How about Nutella? Nutella is a product that was born in the wake of World War II, and because of chocolate scarcity, created a formula using hazelnut, and this is still one of the all-time favorite snacks and even breakfast foods around the world. And both Groupon and Airbnb were born after the 2008 financial crisis because they offered alternatives and solutions to people who were struggling economically, both in terms of shopping as well as traveling. So with that backdrop, I think that there is an actual framework and a mental step-by-step process that we can use that I like to share with you for thinking about crisis as opportunity. The first is just to accept the fact that crisis is nothing more than a form of disruption. It's extreme disruption, and we know disruption is part of the new normal. And in fact, if we really think about it, going back to the 1970s, they happen fairly regularly. So 1973, the oil crises. Then in 1989, of course, the fall of communism, which completely reset the status quo in the world order since World War II. Then 2001, then 2008, the financial crisis, and 2020, the COVID pandemic. Each one is unexpected and very different, but there's a certain cadence to them that every 9 or 10 years, a major black swan or unforeseen circumstance will happen. So we really should embrace this as normal and not be surprised if and when they happen. And once we do this, then we can then adopt what I call a perpetual crisis mindset. So operate with the assumption that standing still is not an option. And once we do that, then what we can do is to look to this wonderful resource that we all have as individuals and as groups, as organizations, which is our creativity, our imagination, and to use that as our springboard into understanding what we should be doing and how we can shape the future and imagine what is next. In order to do that, what we need is a systematic way of harnessing creative thinking and to channel that into the right strategy and innovation. And my premise to you is that that is exactly what the Slingshot framework. And once we have that in place, then we can have an ongoing process to identify new market opportunities in a way that minimizes costs and keeps our staff, our entire team engaged and motivated. And finally, we can do that. We can use this process to really strengthen our relationship with all our stakeholders, especially during crisis when everyone is searching for new connections and new meaning. So let me quickly just address each one of these in turn. First, viewing the current crisis as a form of extreme disruption. We know this term VUCA, which perhaps is now overused, but it is still very useful in having an acronym that reminds us how different the world is. So VUCA stands for this perfect cocktail, this perfect storm of negative or unwanted or undesirable forces around us: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But we need to embrace this as the new normal. This is the environment that we are in today. And to demonstrate how we can approach this new normal, let me quickly share with you this anecdote about 3 tourists who are on a safari in Africa. So the 3 of them are walking along in the Serengeti, and all of a sudden, a ferocious lion jumps out in front of them from out of the bush. And it's right in front of them. It's roaring, it's showing its fangs, it's ready to pounce. Its intentions are very clear. In the moments that aspire, the first tourist is completely stuck, frozen, unable to move at all. The second tourist, after a couple of seconds, starts to throw away all extra equipment. So throws away the machete, binoculars, water bottle, tool belt, vest, while the third tourist is still standing there with her hands in her pocket, just assessing the situation for a couple more seconds. As another few moments pass, the first one, still unable to move, out of the corner of his eyes, looks at the second and says, "You're crazy. There's nothing you can do to outrun that lion, no matter how much of your stuff you throw away." And the second tourist turns to the first and says, "You are right, but it's not the lion that I have to outrun. It's at least one of the 2 of you." And the third tourist, after a few more moments pass, takes out her hand from her pocket with a lighter, lights it, and scares away the lion. And I think that the 3 tourists' reaction is really indicative of the way that organizations react to extreme crisis and disruption. The first, of course, is the worst off because they have no plan, no reaction. They're completely exposed and are unlikely to survive. The second is a little bit better, but their focus is simply on survival. So what they might be doing as the second tourist is getting rid of vital resources just with the hope of survival, which makes it prohibitive for them to actually build or grow or to transform the crisis into opportunity. And the third tourist, of course, represents the best approach because she kicks her creativity, this wonderful resource, into high gear as soon as a new environment is thrust upon her. And by doing so, does something unexpected, but really powerful that puts her in control. So let's build on that. And I'll talk about how we can use this perception and perspective to adopt what I call this perpetual crisis mindset. So this notion that this change all around us is not limited to periods of crises. As these statistics show, the pace of change has been accelerating for quite some time. The lifespan of companies has greatly shrunk and continues to shrink. And on average, companies are born and they fade or die much more frequently than before. And if we look at the new titans, the current champions, the great success stories of this environment, and we look at them together, a couple of fascinating commonalities become apparent. One is just how young these companies are. It's easy to forget that Uber or Airbnb or Google or Apple information of the handheld device, how recent that all has happened. You can also see that these companies can come from anywhere in the world. On this page, they're not only American companies, but one from China, one from Australia, and one from former communist part of Europe. But most fascinating is just the fact that all these companies disrupted market space without having the infrastructure that was deemed necessary to compete in that space. So Uber has no taxis. Airbnb has no chain of hotels. Netflix does not own a portfolio of movie theaters. So in one sense, this is a cautionary tale. If you're running a business with a lot of infrastructure, then you need to understand how to keep that going so that you can continue to support the cost of maintaining infrastructure when someone can compete in your space without having it. But more empowering is the other side, that you can get into almost any business without having to have what was required before as heavy infrastructure to start operating in that. So that is part of the world we live in, and which is why a company like Samsung, which started out as transistor radios in the electronics space, then grew to encompass consumer electronics, and now defines their business as life care, which is a business term they made up, but it signifies that they're thinking well beyond the traditional boundaries of just consumer electronics. And this is their point of view. They manage by this concept of perpetual crises, understanding that they will be changing everything except their families, and that all their products today will be gone in 10 years. So there is a shelf life to everything they're doing, rather than the assumption that it will be long-term. And this mentality allows them to get into completely new businesses, like you see here, which they expect major revenue streams from within a few years. Similarly, McDonald's. Here's a company that you could argue does not need to reinvent itself because it's dominating its industry by such extent. This company feeds about 70 million people a day worldwide. Yet before the financial crisis, I was working with their top executive team precisely because they were thinking beyond their current business. They were already thinking about transformation. And what was fascinating is that I challenged them and pushed them to define their business beyond just nutrition or beyond just food. And we arrived at this concept that ultimately their restaurants should be entertainment destinations. And this was a really fundamental reason that they were so buoyant and so successful, even in the wake of the crisis in 2008, because their restaurants were multi-purpose destinations. The Mac cafes, the flat screen TVs, the free internet allowed people to go there, not just to eat, but to conduct business meetings, bring their children, and have some downtime as well. So let's now look at how we move forward on this idea of perpetual crisis. What is the fuel that ignites our ability to do so? And as Anthony mentioned, there was this fascinating study by IBM. They interviewed 1,500 CEOs across the globe through all kinds of industries. And this was in 2010. So right after the financial crisis, asking the question, what is the single most important leadership trait you need in order to be successful going forward as a senior executive? And the number one answer was creativity. But they also said, those interviewed, that they think creativity is important, not just for themselves personally, but throughout their organization, and that they do not think that they're adequately equipped, that they don't think that they know how to harness and systematically channel creative thinking. Now, another survey, which is a nice complement to this one, asked 100,000 employees across all kinds of businesses and industries. Almost every one of them overwhelmingly said that, yes, creativity is very important to what I do. Less than half of them thought of themselves as being creative, which I think is a something that we're conditioned to think. And look at this, only 2% said that their workplace actually nurtures, encourages creative application. So there's a vast disconnect between what we think is important or what we understand to be critical and what is actually the case. Albert Einstein had many wonderful quotes. This is one of my favorites. He said that imagination is everything. It is the preview to life's coming attractions. And if you think about it, everything that is made by a person was first born in our imagination or in that person's mind before they made it into reality. So when a crisis happens and there's a big reset, we have the power, every one of us, to imagine what is next, the coming attractions, if we harness this wonderful resource. And this other quote that I wanted to share with you is by Peter Merholtz, who is a leading customer experience expert. And Peter said that everything you need to know about innovation, you learned in kindergarten. In other words, our childhood sense of curiosity, fascination, wonder, experimentation is the very seed, the very core of what we need. And what we can therefore do is to reconnect with that sense of curiosity, adventure, and innovation, and have a way of continuously harnessing that. And as a way of kind of reinforcing that point, this concept of intellectual wellness is gaining more and more attention and focus in the wake of the pandemic. And intellectual wellness is not only taught now in more and more universities as part of their business curriculum, but is defined as the successful application of our creative abilities in everyday life, so that we can continuously reinvent and rethink ourselves and everything that we do. So this is the perfect moment to really seize on this opportunity and our ability to harness creative thinking. So how do we do that? And this is where the slingshot framework comes in. So as Anthony mentioned, and you may be familiar with Blue Ocean Strategy, I had the good fortune to be one of the core original members behind this concept. And it was extremely well received, I think, because first of all, the timing was great. Blue Ocean is all about creating your market space. So being able to make sense out of a very turbulent environment and doing something so compelling that you have a massive following, in contrast to Red Ocean, which is the known market space where everybody else is still competing and trying to outdo one another. So Blue Ocean Strategy was published first in book form in 2011. And for over 10 years, I was a blue oceanographer working with companies around the world, helping them understand and apply the concept. But what was fascinating is that although everybody wanted to create a blue ocean for themselves, very few companies were able to do so. And this was the result. So they were stuck between a blue ocean opportunity that they perceived and the red ocean space that they were in. And they thought that they had a trade-off, either go into new space that they're not familiar with the big potential of having it to themselves and creating a market space that no one else is in, or staying in the familiar territory that they know well, which is cutthroat and highly competitive. And faced with that trade-off, most companies pulled back. They were not willing to risk and chance being first in a space. And based on this observation, so here's a visual of this mental dilemma and the fear of leaping into the unknown. So based on this observation, I created the Slingshot framework to make Blue Ocean strategy practical. So in one sense, Slingshot is the application companion to Blue Ocean strategy, but on its own, it's a guide to continuously reimagining boundaries. And at the core of Slingshot is a very basic question. And that is, what do people want? Because every single interaction, every single business process at the end must serve an end customer, an end consumer, an end client. So we need to ask, well, what do they ultimately want in order for us to stay relevant, for us to stay indispensable to them, no matter what happens? And if we ask this question, I love the answer provided by a former Army psychologist who said the following: the human equation is to multiply joy and divide pain. Pain shared is pain divided. Joy shared is joy multiplied. So I think it's a beautiful answer to that question. What do people ultimately want in life? And what I challenge and what I guide companies and leadership teams that I work with to do is to consider themselves as being in the business of multiplying joy and dividing pain for their customers and sharing in those journeys. Okay, because if you can do that, if you can associate whatever you do with this equation in people's mind, then they will stay with you. You will stay relevant and become even indispensable to them. In order to do this, there's really just three key principles that the Slingshot framework brings to life. And if you can get good at these three, then you have a great opportunity to be one of the future shapers. The first one, the most important one, is this idea of learning to identify customer pain points and turning them into points of delight and infatuation. And this by far is the most important one. And notice this is not just about removing a pain point, but transforming the worst part of an experience into the best. So now it becomes the reason that someone does business with you. Let me give you an example in a moment. Second is continuously stretch the definition of what you do. So you never stop saying, this is my business, this is what I provide, but continuously ask, what else could I do for my target audience? And third, take advantage of what I call the innovation shortcut, which is look at around you at all the resources inside and outside of your organization as components that you can combine in new ways. And notice if you do this, then you can minimize your resource needs, because you don't have to invent or invest in anything new, but you look at new combinations that have never been forged between already existing components. So here's an example of all three in action. This is a personal experience that happened a long time ago when I was in college. I went to a classical guitar concert. And this concert still sticks in my memory as one of my favorite all-time culture experiences. And here's why. I went to the hall, the performance hall at the time of the concert. To my surprise, the hall was completely empty. There's nothing inside, but outside at the door, there was a sign that said, welcome, please take your shoes off. To the left, you will see a big assortment of pillows. Take as many as you would like, bring them inside, and configure your seating any way you like. And that's exactly what I did. I grabbed 3 or 4 pillows, went inside, picked the spot, put them exactly how I wanted them to be so that I could lay down exactly in the position that was most comfortable. Everybody else did the same. And then the performer came in and she put her stool right in the middle of everybody else, sat on that, and played the concert. Why was this so special, and why was it still memorable and representative of the concept? Well, one of the key pain points of a live event, of course, is seating. The seats may be uncomfortable, or someone very large may be sitting in front of you, or just in a way that you can't see, and that ruins the whole experience. So in this case, It wasn't about investing in state-of-the-art seating, but the opposite. It was about transforming this potential pain point into the highlight and giving me the right to customize the seating arrangement exactly how I wanted. So this transformed a pain point into a point of delight, in fact, the highlight of the event. It also redefined the experience from simply focusing on the quality of the performer to thinking about the totality of the experience, and in fact extending it well beyond, because we got to take the pillows home, and of course they had the logo of the corporate sponsor on them. And finally, the innovation shortcut, absolutely, this was a combination of two existing things: the hall with traditionally private objects, pillows that we associate with our home. So that is an example of how we want to activate the three concepts of the slingshot framework. And once we do, what we can then have the power is to mobilize everyone in an organization to think like this and go after new opportunities that a crisis brings. And a good way of looking at this is just to ask, how good do you think in general companies are in removing customer pain points? Is there an opportunity? Because arguably during a crisis, all kinds of new pain points come to the surface. People are searching for a new way of living, of working, of understanding how to make sense out of what is happening. So depending on how you see answering this question, you may be very surprised by this statistic. Angry customers cost companies almost $6 trillion. This was a year ago when this number represented over 1/3 of the entire US economy. And as you can see, over half of US consumers switched companies, meaning that they went through the painful process of disentangling a relationship with a current customer and starting another one because they couldn't bear the frustration, the disconnect, the pain any longer. And this is nothing new. This is nothing that we don't experience ourselves. As you can see, the reason why people are feeling pain and anger. And I'm sure that you experience this as well in your dealings with your corporate suppliers. So if this was 10 years ago, how do you think the landscape has changed? Do you think this has gotten better or worse? Well, coincidentally, this survey just came out, and it has a rather funny but also telling title: the National Customer Rage Survey, put out by Arizona State University, just came out a couple of weeks ago. And not surprisingly, at least to me, a record number of Americans are finding fault with companies' products and services. Almost 3 out of 4 responded that they experienced a product or service problem in this past year. And alongside this, the share of consumers taking action to settle scores. So these are people who are particularly upset, so that they actually choose to invest their time into making a statement, is also way up, as you can see, up to 9%. So this satisfaction is prevalent, which is our opportunity, especially during and after crisis. Because if our mission is to always scan and look for pain points and then transform them into points of delight and joy, then we will be the future shapers, that we will be the ones that are creating the blue waters of new space. So let me show you just 2 quick visuals of, again, this sort of transformation. See if you can, just by the visual, understand how a pain point was transformed into a point of delight. So this first picture is that of a baggage carousel when we're waiting for our luggage. I'm sure we can agree that is not a pleasant experience for anybody, right? It's boring. We just want to get it done with and get on our way. Well, a couple of airports in Europe transformed these machines into roulette tables, and they give you the opportunity to play by placing a bet to see on which number your luggage will land on. And if you get it correct, then you win a weekend at a luxury hotel in that city. So again, the whole process and the psychology of it is to take something that the customer dreads, it's a low point of an experience, and transform it into a highlight, which they see as a source of joy. And in this case, it's even a new revenue source for the airports. How about the picture on the right, which is actually someone's social media page? You know you're doing something good if someone calls you a genius at work. This is from Seoul, Korea, from Tesco. Can you see what the is? It's the 1-a-day banana packaging. So instead of having to buy only yellow bananas, which will go ripe way too quickly and you may have to throw away, or green bananas that don't taste good, don't taste really nice for a couple of days, Tesco thought about, how about if we give a nice spectrum from very ripe to less ripe so that you can consume them one a day? And how nice of a message that is in terms of being sustainable, right? Less waste and much more of a pleasing experience. And finally, once we start activating and thinking about crisis this way and systematically applying creativity, we can then reach out to all our stakeholders and make a statement. And during and after crisis, this is exactly what people are looking for. They want companies that show compassion and understanding, even a sense of humor, so that they can relate to you, and then you can relate to them. So here's one of my favorites from the pandemic, this very short little commercial by Snickers.
It's so good to see you guys. Han, out here.
Are we on yet? I thought we were doing a Zoom thing.
Confused?
No.
Maybe you just need a Snickers.
Right? So this has nothing to do, you can argue, with actually consuming Snickers, but in a larger sense, it absolutely does. It's about a brand saying that we understand what you're going through, we care about you, and we want to be there. And here's another example of what I thought was the perfect exemplary leadership. This is the CEO of Movement Mortgage, one of the most the fastest growing mortgage companies and the most transformative, disruptive in the US. Casey Crawford, the CEO, is a former NFL football player. He won a Super Bowl as a tight end with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this is a video that he made within the first couple of weeks of the pandemic. Listen to what he's saying and how he's saying it in terms of inspiring all stakeholders inside and outside his company.
Hey, movement team, you know, we've been talking a lot about adapting and overcoming, adapting and overcoming, adapting and overcoming in the face of adversity. Well, this market is creating a lot of adversity for a lot of people. And I tell you what, the obstacles that we're facing in the industry right now are going to separate the players from the pretenders. The players, they're the ones that are going to get up, adapt, and overcome. The pretenders, they're either going to decide the cost is too high, the work is too much, or they don't have the means or the capability to adapt and overcome the obstacles our industry is throwing at us right now. Movement team, I want you to know you have a lead team that is committed to adapting and overcoming. We love adversity. We love adversity because adversity is an opportunity for us to separate ourselves from the competition. So wake up, know you are part of a winning team. We are waking up, adapting and overcoming to all the changing market conditions right now. I expect you to do the same. From our houses, get up, do our part for America by adapting and overcoming in this new volatile environment so that we can continue to serve American homeowners with excellence and help improve their financial positions in the midst of a tumultuous time. I love you. Keep at it. Keep leading with love.
All right. So he was a little bit out of breath, of course, because he's in the middle of a workout. But I thought that was a really exemplary message, especially in contrast to Corona. So you may have noticed that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of chatter about potentially the virus being in Corona beer because the name, of course, was the same. And even one survey showed that almost 40% of beer drinking Americans wanted to stay away from Corona just because of the name association. Yet what I thought was, again, what an amazing opportunity in disguise, that as Corona, this is something that we can leverage to completely position the company as the corporate leader in the right response. During the pandemic, alcoholic sales were up significantly. So Corona could have stepped up and said, we will donate 5% of our revenues to help those most in need. And thereby they would have, again, gained incredible goodwill and connection with the public. What did Corona do? By the way, social media followers, they have a huge online community. They did absolutely nothing. They didn't do anything. They let this negative dialogue and narrative circulate around them, and they did nothing. They didn't step up, and they didn't even do what I thought would have been a perfect imagery, which is what they do in their commercials, is to use 2 Corona bottles separated by a lime and say, safe social distancing. Corona is with you in this incredibly difficult time. So let me, in wrapping up, just revisit where we started, the 6 steps that I think allow us to very quickly pivot and to look at crisis as opportunity, all the way from viewing the crisis as a form of extreme disruption and a new normal, all the way to taking advantage of a crisis to actually strengthen our relationships and community leaderships and to revitalize our value proposition to all around us. So in terms of resources, as Anthony mentioned, the Slingshot book, and I'd like to make that available to you if you use this discounted code through the website that you see here. I think it's worth sharing that true to the actual concept, the way that I reimagined business books through this work was that, number one, the book is all illustrated by children. Number two, it has original music, so you can immerse yourself as you read in an auditory experience as well. And it is positioned only as privately available, so it serves as an exclusive resource. And there's, of course, the framework, the rigorous framework behind, and the application process. If that's something that interests you, please ask me in our Q&A coming up, or just contact me directly. So I'd like to leave you with one of my favorite quotes, and then another just small image to help you remember these concepts. And the quote is by Steve Denning, who wrote an article in Forbes magazine years ago, and I love this excerpt from it. Steve said that a company doesn't find new ways to delight customers, it creates them, right? It's an active process. It's something that we need to continuously do. In strategic thinking, there's no such thing as a mature industry. There's only an industry to which imagination has yet to be applied. So there it is, the key ingredient. And what is most important is that imagination, when applied from the perspective of the customer, so the customer experience, the opportunities for your growth and for your ongoing relevance are boundless. So I think it's a really nice summary of the concepts that I just shared with you. And finally, here's just a little another little anecdote to take with you. Just imagine that you're having a dream, and in this dream, you're at the top of a mountain in the middle of winter. It's a lot of snow, it's windy, and it's getting dark. And you need to get down to the bottom, to the village below. You do have skis on, but when you look down the slope, and that's the only way down, you realize that it seems well beyond your ability. It's very icy and it's very steep. So how are you going to get down? Well, if you're fearful, then what you're going to do is, as you start your descent, you're going to lean back out of fear, right? But once you do that, you're putting weight on the back of your skis, and that accelerates your descent, and you'll be out of control. So what you really want to do is lean forward, because when you lean forward, you put your weight on the front of the skis that allows you to stay in control. So with that in mind, lean forward into the crisis and seize the moment so that you see it as an opportunity. Okay. So thank you for listening, and let me stop sharing and then open it up.
Thank you so much, Gabor. That's wonderful. As always, it's just incredible listening to you talk in your presentation. I love the thing about multiply joy and divide pain. That's excellent. And really thinking about opportunities for really meaningful new customer experiences. This is excellent. So we do want to transition to Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat window. We have our first question here from Barbara. And she says, by the way, she's looking forward to getting your book and reading it. But the question is, what approaches have you found successful in changing senior corporate leadership mindsets to be able to embrace the chaos from a place of strength instead of having a fear-based approach?
Great question, Barbara. Thank you. So my background beside business is psychology. So I've always been really fascinated exactly by that, is how do you change people's mindset? How do you enable positivity when there's fear and negativity, right? And so one of the things that I do is that I reference this old Southern saying, which goes like this: you can't see the label if you're inside the jar, right? And so that's true with everybody. And that's something that everybody can understand and relate to, that if I'm in any business, I can't help but assume its rules, its regulations, its traditions, its definitions, right? So then the next step I do is to say, I will show you all the self-imposed mental boundaries you put around yourself by giving you a 6-question test. And I will challenge you that you will not get more than 2 of the 6 questions correct. And everybody takes that bet. That seems like they would win. And most invariably, they don't. So very few people get more than 2 out of the 6 questions correct, because it exposes our self-imposed limitations. And once I do this, so once I bring in a very benign way a leadership team, whether they are open to innovation or not yet open to it, once I expose them to this reality that they are themselves not considering enough of their possibilities around them, then their enthusiasm and interest level opens up. And then we start the journey, right? And by the way, one of the questions is simply, what business are you in? And I'm going to share with you that for me, the correct response is no longer than 4 words, because if it is longer than 4, then it's too diluted or confusing and hard to remember, and should have nothing to do with what you actually make or do, but how you drive and connect what people actually want. So based on that quote that Anthony again referenced, my favorite answer to that question is, we are in the business of multiplying joy and dividing pain, no matter what business you are in. Because if you can do that, if you can actually equate yourself with that in the mind of your customers, then you will have an ongoing relationship. You will become indispensable to them. So Barbara, that's the process. That's how I take leadership teams through the journey and convert them into future shapers.
Very good. Thank you, Gabor. And one of the things, going back to Blue Ocean strategy, I've always thought of Blue Ocean strategies in a nutshell as like completely rewiring the basis of competition, looking at what really matters to customers from a different lens, a different perspective, and using your imagination and creativity. And this is especially useful when there's some disruption or change in like consumer preferences change, for example. But most organizations may not even be attuned to this because they're not out scanning the horizon, looking at the weak signals and knowing, oh yeah, there's starting to be some shifts in consumer preference or other critical uncertainties. And the organizations that pick up on this, all of a sudden they realize here's an opportunity to speak to those changes and rewire the whole basis for competition. And I think that's so important. But so here's my question for you. A lot of the organizations we encounter, though, they want to camp on their current core competencies and think we got to really build on those. And to me, and I want to hear your opinion on this, to me, that's a limitation because tomorrow may require us to develop new core competencies. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely. So there's a lot of reasons why there could be resistance. And of course, every company has already certain frameworks that they use. So, this idea of core competencies and is certainly one. And many companies are, for example, big Six Sigma fans and others where they strive for operational excellence. So what I do is I don't challenge that, right? I provide a different filter and I say, what we want to really do is focus on the customer experience. Okay, let's look at that in terms of how you serve your customers today. And by the way, that's one of my other early questions when any leadership team is to ask, are you a customer of your own business? And to what extent and how? And but what I found is most leadership teams cannot legitimately say that they are customers, right? They themselves are disconnected to that extent from what their company does, that they are not using that product or service. But when we start talking about customer experience and we start to identify key pain points and then coming up with ways to transform them, then we revisit the questions of resources, right? How do we use our current resources, our current competencies? And because one of the key tenets that I also profess is innovation shortcut, right? Combining, using already existing things in new ways. That's where we start. What are you already good at? How do we leverage that to serve customers? Jeff Bezos very famously said, when asked, what is Amazon business, he said that it's very easy. What we look at is our customers, and what we look at is what we think they need and they want. And then what we're going to do is get good at providing them with those things, no matter what that takes, right? And that's the new mentality versus going the other way that you said, this is what we have, what's the best we can do with it, right? And the connection between the two is, I think, the innovation shortcut is to say, let's leverage what we have by understanding what we can do to the customer to transform pain into joy.
Right. And that's the same as having what's called a solution-focused mindset versus a problem-focused mindset.
Sure.
Solution-focused says they look at the future and they say, here's the solution we want to deliver, and then they work backwards to what do we have to do to get there. The traditional problem focus is like, well, here's a problem and here's what we have today, and how do we incrementally work toward that? We may or may not get there, right?
Sure.
So it's very important to really get that customer experience, that solution in mind, and figure out, like you said, what do we have to do to actually get there and deliver that?
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Here's a question. Here's another question. This one's from Taiwo, and he wants to know, how do you balance creativity with expected failure and budget cap? For example, during military drills that involve firearms, I was made to understand that there's a percentage of fatality allowable. Is it advisable to apply this in innovation?
Wow, very good question. There's in innovation, there's always an element of risk, and I'm reminded by one of the personalities that I interviewed when I released my book. Was Dudley Stokes. And Dudley Stokes was one of the founders of the Jamaican bobsled team, which you may remember made a big splash in the Winter Olympics coming from Jamaica. And he was actually part of the Jamaican armed forces. So he was an officer. And it was fascinating to hear his take on this. That was the question I asked him. You're a military man. What are you doing inventing something crazy? And he said, to us, the two are absolutely go hand in hand. You have to have discipline, but you also need creativity and understanding how to best manage resources and to deal with the unexpected. The same way when I was down in Chile, I got a call from the head of the Chilean Air Force who wanted to meet with me. And it was fascinating. We had a meeting in the Officers Club of the Chilean Air Force, which has one of the strangest geographies in the world. It's a very long country, but very thin. So their challenges in terms of safety, military, and also just public safety was really exceptional. And that was his whole point also, is that you need to combine understanding, discipline, and creativity together. So what I would say to the question more specifically is that as an organization, you're right. You don't want to ignore failure, but rather understand and build in your formula. So in a military, your appetite, your allowance for failure would understandably be much less than if you were a fast-going startup and you're looking at all kinds of innovation directions as your next big thing, right? But you need to make that as part of your culture so that people are not afraid of failure, because you want them to be taking risks, but you want to quantify to what extent they can.
Yeah. And I think a complementary idea is, you need to think about every new idea we have. We approach it as an experiment. We have hypotheses about what might work. And the old approach, the non-lean approach, which is say we're going to assume this works and we're going to do it, and doggone it, it failed. Shame on us. But the lean approach is let's go out and let's consider this an experiment to test our hypotheses and learn. And so it's not really a failure so much as we simply learned that the hypothesis was not right. And so if we take this in incremental steps, so we figure out the concept and then go test the concept as early as possible, then we're going to fail a little bit earlier. But it's not a failure of a business venture. It's a failure of it's really not a failure at all. It's a learning experience.
That's right.
Of our experiment. And I think if organizations can move toward this idea of everything is an experiment, and we're going to approach it as an experiment. It's a learning experience. Failure goes away. It's just a learning experience.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about GI&I, is that you have a very good process for exactly that, is to quantify and codifying innovation so that it becomes a phase-by-phase approach. It's not, here's an idea and now we're implementing it. It will either fail or be successful, but you have steps along the way that minimize the risk of failure, or they identify its possibility early enough so that you can pivot or do something else. And I think, again, that's one of the areas where the Institute, I think, is really doing something significant and creating, that sort of framework.
Thank you so much. So we have time for one last question, and we have a question here from Charles Casson. And his comment is this: many thanks, George. My major concern is crossing over from the red ocean to the blue ocean, which is very uncertain. It looks like a leap in the dark. How can one overcome the fear, and what is the drive to make this leap?
Yes, and I don't know if you were with us when I was talking about that, but let me then summarize that exact fear is what led me to create the Slingshot framework, because I saw too many companies struggling with that, or leaders struggling with that trade-off, right? And so in Slingshot, you no longer need to make that trade-off, because what we talk about is 3 levels of blue waters. Blue lake, which is to say, how do you optimize and refresh what you're already doing? Or if you're a startup, how do you optimize and refresh what someone else is doing? Then blue sea, which is how do you expand on that? And then third is the blue ocean. What are you going to create that no one has done before, right? So you don't need to leap from red ocean to blue ocean, which is scary and completely new and untested, but you can do this gradually. Blue lake, blue sea, blue ocean. And just as the waters, a small idea, which is blue lake, flows and becomes a blue sea, because now you see its full potential and can even become a blue ocean. So you can have a much more structured and measured approach to innovation and still be in the blue rather than only think about blue oceans.
Yeah, very good. And I believe that framework of blue lake, blue sea, blue ocean is covered in your book, The Slingshot Method. Is that?
It is not, because it's something that has been developed since then. So the book is more about the mindset shift And then, of course, the framework and the application, a lot of things have evolved in the last 10, 11 years. But in my work, that is now, and my articles. So if you look at some of my recent articles, I do talk about that.
Excellent. Very good. All right. So if people want to get in touch with you, you visit your website.
LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn is really the only social media where I'm active. So please connect me on LinkedIn or my website. Happy to continue the conversation. Absolutely.
All right, GaborGeorgeBurt.com. So with that, we want to thank you so much for being our guest today. And I want to thank all of our attendees who've been with us today so much for your participation. And this has been an excellent conversation. I see in the chat here that Chris has indicated this is a mind blower, blowing his mind. So this is great. So a lot of great feedback on the presentation. So we really appreciate your time, Gabor, and we want to wish everyone a great day. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony, for having me.
All right. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Goodbye.